don't steal your peace with fists. They don't destroy your confidence with facts. They do it with a smirk, a single sentence, a jab disguised as a joke. And in that moment, before your mind catches up, your body reacts: tight chest, fast breath, rising heat in your cheeks. That's all it takes. One comment, and suddenly, you're not in control anymore. You've been hijacked. The person in front of you, maybe it's a coworker, a partner, a so-called friend, has figured out the cheat code. They know exactly which string to pull. And the worst part, you know, it's happening. You can feel yourself slipping into that same old reaction. Again, Riley was in that exact moment, sitting across a glass conference table in a San Francisco tech startup. She had prepared a detailed report she'd worked on all weekend. And then Melissa, the queen of condescension, leaned back in her chair and said, "Well, some of us actually check our work before presenting it." Everyone looked around awkwardly. The silence after the jab said more than the jab itself. Old Riley would have snapped, corrected Melissa, defended her work, maybe even stormed out. But this version of Riley, she looked up. She smiled, not out of sarcasm, but stillness, and she kept going. Because that day, she made a decision. No one gets to pull me out of my peace. That's the turning point most people never reach. We live like emotional puppets, our strings, available to anyone who knows how to yank them. We think people hurt us because they're mean, manipulative, or cruel. But the truth, they only win when we react. They only own us when we hand them the remote control of our emotions. And that is where Stoicism comes in, not as philosophy, but as armor. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Choose not to be harmed and you won't be." But what does that really mean? It means your power lies not in defending yourself, but in not needing to. It means the storm only affects you if you open your windows to let it in. The real enemy isn't the toxic person. It's your reflexive need to prove, argue, or explain. It's your inability to sit with discomfort without trying to control it. And that enemy lives inside of you. But here's the secret the strongest people know. When you master stillness, you become untouchable. Stillness doesn't mean silence. It means presence. It means being so rooted in who you are that no insult, no sarcasm, no manipulation can shake you from yourself. While the world screams louder, the truly powerful go quieter. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they know what's not worth saying. Riley didn't win that meeting because she embarrassed Melissa. She won because Melissa couldn't shake her. The jab fell flat. No reaction, no emotion, just poise. And that calmness, that unbothered energy. It was louder than any clapback could have been. In a world addicted to emotional noise, stillness is rebellion. And you, yes, you have that power. But it must be trained. You don't stumble into self-control. You build it. Day by day. Choice by choice. Breath by breath. So ask yourself, how many hours of your life have you wasted reacting to people who didn't deserve a second of your energy? How many days have been ruined by one petty comment? How many nights have you spent arguing in your head with someone who forgot what they said an hour later? It ends now. Because once you stop reacting, you stop bleeding power. And when you stop bleeding power, you start living from your center, not from their chaos. If this truth hit you, if some part of you whispered, "That's me," then you're in the right place. We're just getting started. Make sure to subscribe to this channel if you want more content like this every week. It gives us the motivation to keep showing up with insight, clarity, and the emotional tools you deserve. And now here's a quick question for you. Let's see how self-aware you really are. Which of these do you do more often when someone triggers you? A snap back, or defend yourself immediately? B. Pause, breathe, and let it pass. Drop your answer below in the comments. A or B. There's no shame here, just awareness. Jared didn't realize he had been training his emotions to obey guilt until it hit him in the face again. He had just landed at O'Hare Airport in Chicago for a long overdue family visit, and no sooner had he texted his sister Rebecca to let her know he'd arrived than her reply came through like clockwork. "Wow, must be nice to live so freely without family responsibilities weighing on you." And there it was, the same tone, the same passive-aggressive jab laced with obligation, carefully disguised as concern. Jared knew what came next, the sinking feeling, the spiral of self-judgment, the quiet resentment that grew into internal chaos. It wasn't the words that hurt most. It was the way they dug into an old wound he thought had scarred over. But this time, something was different. This time, Jared had been preparing not for battle, but for discipline, and the battleground was no longer his sister's words. It was his own mind. We train our bodies at the gym. We learn skills in school. But when it comes to emotional resilience, most people wing it. And that's why they break. That's why one text, one comment, one tone from a family member can shatter their peace like glass. Emotional discipline doesn't happen by accident. It's a daily commitment. It's not about suppressing your feelings or pretending you're unaffected. It's about building the space between stimulus and response, about choosing your reaction rather than being ruled by it. Jared had spent the past few months building what he now called his emotional armor. Not walls to keep people out, but layers of understanding, intention, and practice that allowed him to stay in his power when old patterns tried to pull him under. He started by journaling every night, brutally honest with himself. His favorite prompt: where did I bleed energy today, and why? The first week was painful, pages full of regret, defensiveness, replays of conversations that haunted him. But the more he wrote, the clearer the patterns became. Guilt was his lever, obligation was his chain, and Rebecca, knowingly or not, had always known how to yank both. Next came rehearsal, not in front of a mirror, but in his mind, before flying to Chicago. Jared sat in silence every morning and pictured the interactions he feared most. He imagined her sarcastic tone, the sly digs, the intentional reminders of everything he wasn't doing right. And then, he practiced his reaction. Not what he'd say, but how he'd feel, how he'd breathe, how he'd pause. He practiced calm like it was a martial art, because that's exactly what it is. Emotional stillness isn't a default setting, it's a technique. It's the ability to stay rooted in yourself while someone else tries to make you leave your center. You don't fight fire with fire. You outlast it with stillness. Jared also learned to regulate his nervous system in The technique was simple. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8. It grounded him instantly, reminding his body it wasn't in danger even if his mind felt provoked. He started using it in meetings, on calls, and yes, during awkward family dinners. So when Rebecca greeted him with that signature cocktail of guilt and mockery, Jared didn't flinch. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't even tighten his jaw. He smiled, genuinely, and he said, "It's good to see you too." Not because he was trying to be the bigger person, but because he was the more grounded one now. Training your emotional reflexes isn't glamorous. No one sees the work. There are no trophies for not reacting. No applause for the argument you didn't have. But there's something far more valuable. Peace. Real peace. The kind of peace that doesn't vanish the moment someone pushes your buttons. Because you've already rewired those buttons. You've replaced guilt with boundaries. You've replaced defensiveness with clarity. You've replaced emotional chaos with quiet control. And that kind of strength, it's terrifying to people who are used to manipulating you. Because now, they can't. Jared didn't come to Chicago to win a war. He came to practice peace under pressure. And every passive jab Rebecca threw was another opportunity to train. Another emotional rep in the gym of self-mastery. By the end of the weekend, something strange had happened. Rebecca got quieter, less pointed. She didn't know why exactly, but something had shifted. Her usual scripts no longer worked. Jared wasn't playing the role she had written for him, and that's what happens when you build emotional armor. You don't need to fight the battle because you're no longer vulnerable to the weapons. The war ends the moment you stop stepping onto the field. Claire always knew Thanksgiving in Boston came with more than cranberry sauce and pumpkin pie. It came with a different kind of tension, not the kind that screamed or slammed doors, but the kind that slipped quietly into the room disguised as humor. And that year, as she sat at the crowded table with relatives she hadn't seen since last November, she felt it coming before it even arrived. Her Uncle Doug was pouring himself another glass of wine when he glanced up and said, "Still single, huh? Maybe you're just too picky for your own good." He laughed. Others chuckled along. Claire didn't. Not because she was offended, but because she was awake. She had heard that line, or versions of it, her entire adult life. But for the first time, it didn't land. Not because it didn't sting, because she didn't receive. Silence filled the space where a snappy reply once lived. Claire didn't flinch. She didn't defend her life, or roll her eyes, or explain the complexities of her choices to someone who had never earned the right to hear them. She simply lifted her glass, smiled softly, not out of sarcasm, but sovereignty, and said nothing. And in that silence, everything shifted. Because silence, when chosen consciously, is not the absence of power, is the purest form of it. We live in a world that teaches us to clap back, speak up, make a scene, and prove our point. But sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do is to stay still while someone tries to pull you into a storm they created for attention. Claire understood this now. Some people don't want resolution, they want reaction. They want to feel relevant by dragging you into their emotional theater. And when you don't participate, when you refuse to play the role they've cast for you, you break the cycle. You steal the scene. You reclaim your peace. There was a time when Claire would have taken that comment personally. She would have felt the need to explain herself, justify her timeline, maybe even lash out in frustration, but not anymore. Because now she recognized what Doug's comments really were: projections. His discomfort with silence, his fear of introspection, his need to say something, anything to distract himself from the growing emptiness he carried. But the truth is, silence doesn't just disarm the provocateur, it forces them to face themselves. And that's what most people fear. They're not afraid of being ignored. They're afraid of what echoes back at them when you no longer fill the space with noise. Claire had a simple mantra she repeated to herself in moments like this: "I do not need to be understood to be at peace." It anchored her, protected her, gave her permission to walk through life without constantly explaining herself to people committed to misunderstanding her. That evening, the energy around the table began to shift. Doug, clearly unsettled by her lack of response, tried to pivot, to pull someone else into his performance, but it was too late. Claire had set a tone not for confrontation, but for calm authority. And authority, when it doesn't seek approval, becomes magnetic. The beauty of a silent response isn't just that it protects your peace, it also reveals truth. It shows you who is addicted to drama and who is capable of sitting in stillness with you. It shows you whose words are meant to connect, whose are designed to control, and perhaps most importantly, it shows you what you're made of. Because the hardest thing in the world is to stay quiet when your ego is screaming to be heard. But that's the crucible where emotional maturity is forged. That's the place where you learn that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. Claire left the dinner that night, not angry, not drained, not even victorious. She left whole, because for the first time, she didn't let someone else write the narrative of her worth. She didn't give her uncle's outdated opinion the authority to disrupt her internal harmony. And the next time someone tried to bait her with passive aggression or subtle condescension, she didn't reach for words, she reached for breath. She let the moment pass, and in doing so, she stood taller than any argument ever could have made her. The silent response doesn't mean you're afraid to speak. It means you're wise enough to know when speaking gives your power away. Let others perform. Let them stir. Noise and fish for reactions. You'll be the calm in the room. Be the one who doesn't flinch. Be the one who doesn't explain. Be the one who teaches through presence. That's the kind of strength no one sees coming until it changes everything. Isabella woke up every morning to the sound of waves crashing outside her Miami apartment. The city was alive, vibrant, warm, chaotic in its beauty. But none of that matched the quiet war playing out inside her. Because every morning, before she even got out of bed, her thumb would hover over the Instagram app. And even though she told herself she was done, she always looked. She always checked. One more time. Her ex had moved on publicly, unapologetically, smiling in new photos, with new people. And though Isabella had blocked him, deleted his number, and told all her friends she was over it, she wasn't. Not really. Because he still lived rent-free in her mind. That's the brutal truth about emotional codependency. Doesn't end when contact ends. It ends when you stop needing them to validate your story. It ends when you reclaim your mind from the cycles they once controlled. And that, Isabella realized, is the hardest detachment of all. Physical distance is easy. Anyone can move cities, delete photos, block numbers, but mental freedom, that takes something deeper. That takes truth. She started small. One morning, instead of checking social media, she wrote a letter she never planned to send. It began with honesty and ended in fire. Literally, she burned it on her balcony, watching every sentence turn to ash, not to erase the pain, but to accept it. And in that act, she understood something profound. Closure isn't given, it's chosen. True detachment isn't about becoming cold or heartless. It's not pretending the past didn't matter. It's allowing the past to matter enough that you learn from it and then walk away from it without dragging the weight with you. Isabella began building rituals around her healing. Every Sunday at sunrise, she walked along the shoreline, each step a declaration. I am done chasing ghosts. With every deleted message, she whispered, I am no longer for rent. These weren't dramatic gestures, they were symbolic. Closures, physical actions that mirrored the emotional boundaries she was finally beginning to honor. Because emotional codependency doesn't just survive on love, it survives on fantasy. The fantasy that they'll one day realize what they lost. The fantasy that if you had said one more thing, stayed a little longer, fought a little harder, they would have chosen you differently. But that fantasy is a trap. It's a cage made of hope. And Isabella was done feeding it. She stopped telling herself lies like they didn't mean to hurt me. No, they did. Maybe not out of malice, but they knew. They saw her pain and kept pressing. That wasn't misunderstanding. That was misalignment. And misalignment, when held onto, becomes self-abandonment. She gave up needing an apology, gave up explaining herself to people who never really listened, gave up performing emotional labor for someone who didn't know how to carry their own weight. And slowly, so slowly, something shifted. Freedom started showing up in the quietest ways. A day without checking. A moment of genuine laughter with friends. A night where sleep came easy. She began to recognize herself again, not the version she had become in the relationship, the one who bent and broke and overgave, but the version that existed before the craving for external validation took over. Detachment isn't disconnection, it's reclamation. It's remembering that your worth isn't something others are qualified to measure. It's realizing that being misunderstood by the wrong person doesn't mean you were wrong. It means they were incapable of understanding. Isabella no longer waited for messages that never came. She no longer romanticized people who mistook her openness for weakness. She started measuring her healing not by how much she forgot, but by how much she no longer reacted. When his name came up, it no longer hit like a punch. It landed like a page in a chapter she no longer needed to reread. And that's what freedom feels like. You don't get there by pretending it didn't hurt. You get there by facing the pain without letting it define you, by choosing, over and over again, to come home to yourself. Isabella's story didn't end with a dramatic confrontation or a sudden moment of closure. It ended in silence, in space, in sacred distance, in finally choosing herself, not because he told her she was worthy, but because she remembered she always was. She didn't block him out of spite. She didn't walk away in anger. She simply detached with dignity, and in doing so, she found something no apology could ever give her, peace that didn't depend on someone else's permission. When Derek stepped out of that downtown cafe in Austin, Texas, the air was heavy, not with humidity, but with betrayal. He had just read the final message from his business partner, the one who'd taken clients, contacts, and years of shared dreams in one calculated move. It wasn't just a professional loss, it felt personal. It was personal. Derek stood still, phone in hand, as the noise of the city kept moving around him. Horns, chatter, coffee cups, clinking, and yet, inside, everything had gone quiet. That kind of pain isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It settles, like dust after an explosion. And in the silence, a dangerous thought crept in. You were a fool. But Derek didn't spiral. Not this time, because while the betrayal was real, he had something more powerful than revenge. He had direction. We are taught to bury pain, to drink it away, scroll it away, distract it into submission. But what if pain isn't something to be avoided, but something to be mined? What if the heartbreak isn't a wound, but a well? Derek went home and did something strange. He didn't call friends. He didn't rant online. He opened a blank page and wrote 3 words at the top. I survived you. It wasn't an attack. It was a declaration, a beginning. That night, he outlined a vision for something new. Not another business for profit, but a mission rooted in everything that had just been ripped from him. Trust, values, clarity, he called it Phoenix Rising. It would be a mentorship platform for young entrepreneurs who had been manipulated, misled, or misused by people they once trusted. Derek's idea wasn't born from spite. It was born from fire, the kind that doesn't destroy but refines. There's a concept in Stoicism that says, the obstacle is the way. And while it sounds poetic on paper, in practice, it's brutal. Because to walk through that fire, you must feel everything. You must let the pain pierce you. You must stay awake inside the discomfort long enough to find the lesson buried beneath the wreckage. Derek learned something powerful. Pain, when faced with intention, becomes fuel. Not the kind that burns hot and fast, but the kind that sustains you for the long haul. The kind that carves out clarity. The kind that forces you to stop pretending and start becoming. He started using his mornings differently. Instead of replaying the betrayal, he trained mentally, emotionally, spiritually. He wrote mantras on sticky notes and placed them on his mirror. This pain is not the end of me. I do not need closure to move forward. Your lie does not define my truth. And he worked, quietly, with discipline, with vision. Each time he felt the bitterness rise, he asked himself, can this be used? If the answer was yes, he wrote it down. If it was no, he let it go. He wasn't trying to get over it. He was letting it evolve him. Over the next few months, Phoenix Rising became real. He started holding workshops, writing articles, mentoring people who had lost more than money. They had lost confidence. And each time he helped someone rise, a part of his own power returned. Not because they said thank you, but because his pain finally had a purpose. That's the secret no one tells you. Your greatest revenge is not moving on quickly. It's rebuilding so completely that they wouldn't recognize the version of you that rose from the ashes they left behind. Derek stopped waiting for an apology. He stopped trying to be understood. He stopped hoping that the person who broke him would ever acknowledge the damage they caused. He realized the apology he was craving had already arrived, was his own voice, saying, "I will never let someone dim me again." Turning pain into power doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means owning it, shaping it, and using it as proof that you are no longer who you were when they hurt you. Derek walks differently now. He speaks slower. His laugh is deeper. He's not trying to prove anything anymore. He already did. Pain will visit all of us. Betrayal will happen. Loss is inevitable. But what you do with that pain, that's where the power lies. And when you learn to use it, to mold it, to transmute, and not into resentment, but into resilience, you become something. No one expected you become untouchable. Not because nothing can hurt you, but because nothing can stop you from becoming more because of it. It was just before sunrise when the notification lit up the screen. A familiar name. A message filled with all the same emotional hooks. "So I guess you're done talking." Typical. The words were sharp, laced with guilt, as if your silence were a crime. But this time, you didn't answer. You didn't delete it in anger. You didn't screenshot it for validation. You just let it sit, because something had changed. You were no longer reachable. That morning, as you stood on a ridge overlooking Yosemite Valley, wrapped in stillness and cool mountain air, you realized this wasn't just silence, it was sovereignty. You didn't need to block them. You didn't need to explain. You didn't need a dramatic ending. The relationship didn't collapse. It simply dissolved when it ran out of access to your energy. This is what it means to become untouchable. Not in the sense of being superior, but in the sense of no longer being available for emotional games. No longer being pulled by bait. No longer bleeding for people who find joy in your confusion. The fortress of inner peace isn't made of steel or walls. It's made of decisions, quiet, daily decisions about what you allow in, what you engage with, and who you permit to shape your emotional world. It's not loud, it's not forceful, it's sacred, and it's protected by clarity. Clarity about your worth, about your energy, about the fact that not everyone deserves a front row seat to your life. You begin to curate your emotional space the way an artist curates a gallery. Every thought, every response, every interaction intentional, not because you're cold, but because your peace is now a priority, not a casualty. There was a time when the slightest insult would have triggered days of internal spirals, when being misunderstood would have driven you to over-explain, overextend, overcompensate, when silence from someone you loved felt like abandonment instead of protection. But those days are behind you, because now you know something they don't. The most powerful move isn't confrontation. It's detachment. Detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've stopped negotiating your mental stability in the court of someone else's chaos. You don't argue with people who twist your words. You don't plead for understanding from those committed to misunderstanding. You don't beg for peace in rooms built for war. Instead, you walk out and you build your own room, one where peace is the baseline, not the battle. You do it with practices so subtle, they look like nothing from the outside. A morning mantra, nothing outside me controls my peace. A weekly energy audit, who is draining me, and why am I allowing it? You don't just set boundaries, you become them. Not through force, but through presence. You start viewing emotional entanglements like contracts. Some expired years ago, but were never formally closed. Now, you review them all, and you start saying no, not with bitterness, but with finality. That's the quiet evolution no one warns you about. The version of you that no longer needs revenge, no longer wants to be seen, no longer fights for roles in other people's stories. The version of you who knows this. If they still have emotional power over you, it's not because they're strong. It's because you've left a door open. So, you start closing doors. Gently, firmly. You stop chasing clarity from people who benefit from your confusion. You stop auditioning for love that demands your silence. You stop explaining your worth to people who couldn't recognize gold if it was handed to them. And then it happens one day. You get a message, a jab, a memory, and it doesn't move you. Not because you're numb, but because you've risen. And where you're standing now, their chaos can't reach. That's what it means to become untouchable. Not because you've escaped the world, but because you've created a world within yourself that doesn't shake every time someone else throws a storm. And the beauty of that is this: you didn't need to fight them. You didn't need to destroy anything. You simply stopped feeding what was never yours to carry. You've built something far more dangerous than anger. You've built silence, and in that silence, they lose the only thing they ever had: your attention. You're gone, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and that absence, that's where they lose their grip, because the fire dies the moment you stop giving it oxygen. And you don't just survive, you rise, you thrive. You become the one thing no manipulator knows how to handle, a person they can no longer touch. This wasn't a story about revenge. It wasn't about outsmarting a manipulator, winning arguments, or proving your worth to people who refuse to see it. It was about something far more powerful, something quieter, harder, and ultimately life-changing. It was about Riley learning not to flinch when disrespected in the boardroom, about Jared no longer carrying guilt that didn't belong to him, about Claire mastering the moment at the dinner table where her silence spoke louder than any comeback, about Isabella finally cutting the invisible strings that tied her to a past that never truly honored her, about Derek building an empire from the ashes of betrayal, and about you standing in Yosemite, phone buzzing, mind still, spirit unmoved together. These stories weren't separate. They were steps in a journey, a transformation, from reactivity to resilience, from emotional chaos to inner command, from over-explaining and overthinking to breathing, choosing, and rising. What each character discovered was simple, but not easy. You don't become untouchable by building higher walls. You become untouchable by going deeper within. They stopped seeking closure. They stopped arguing for clarity. They stopped trying to win love that came with conditions. And in that stillness, they found something more powerful than any external validation: self-respect. That's what Stoicism is really about. Not suppressing emotion, but mastering it. Not avoiding difficult people, but transforming your relationship with your own mind so that no matter who you face, you remain rooted in peace. You see, toxic people don't fear your anger. They expect it. They feed on it. What terrifies them is your indifference, your refusal to engage, your stillness. Because when you stop playing the game ends. And when the game ends, so does their control. So what's the lesson? It's this: you don't have to fix anyone. You don't have to prove anything. You don't need closure to heal or a conversation to walk away. What you need is commitment to your peace, to your self-worth, to your energy. Because no one is entitled to access your emotional world unless they know how to treat it with care. Apply this to your life today. The next time someone tries to pull you into chaos, pause. The next time guilt creeps in, ask if it's even yours. The next time you're tempted to over-explain your truth, don't let your silence carry it for you. Train your mind to be still. Discipline your emotions to serve your vision, not your wounds. And build your life from the inside out so no one on the outside can shake it. That's how you rise. That's how you become untouchable, not because nothing touches you, but because nothing can move you without your permission. Now, I want to hear from you. What part of this story resonated with you the most? Have you ever chosen silence over reaction, and what happened when you did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's build a space where we learn from each other, where your wisdom becomes part of someone else's breakthrough. And if this video gave you strength, clarity, or even a moment of peace, don't forget to subscribe. It helps us keep creating content that sharpens your inner power every single week. Because peace isn't a moment, it's a mindset, and we're building it together. one story at a time.